Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Johnny Talks and to another video. Today's video is not so much about the conflict in Israel and Palestine, which killed over 100 innocent Palestinians, injuring several thousand, or the stories that really matter about it, like is Israel an apartheid state? Should the US keep sending them billions of dollars in military aid? Or should the US start looking at the Palestinian people as equal human beings? No, we're not going to talk about those things. Instead, we are going to enter a space in which intellect reigns supreme, in which the modern day philosophers stake out a course for what will be our fantastic tomorrow. I am of course talking about Bari Weiss and her reactions to the backlash against Israel in the United States, and her constant claims of antisemitism against progressives. There's almost nothing in this world that upsets me more than when elites use marginalized groups as a shield to cover for evil. We all know that Israel is a state that occupied the Palestinian people entirely since 1967, and that they have draconian policies of occupation that make living and movement for Palestinians very difficult. We know that they have blockades against Gaza, when making it impossible for them even to fish in their own waters a certain distance from the shore. So Bari Weiss couldn't really defend the Israeli government on its own merit. She had to introduce something else. You see, Israel isn't so much crushing an uprising. They are fighting for their lives, as she wrote in an article following the backlash Israel received in the United States. She writes that Netanyahu's governing coalition, had he managed to form it, was likely to include Israel's own ethno-nationalists, people with vile racist ideas that should remain beyond the pale. As you can see, she tries to condemn ethno-nationalism and right-wing extremism in Israel. But just one paragraph later, she writes, "Some of these people are entirely innocent non-combatants, including children. This is an unspeakable tragedy. It's also one of the unavoidable burdens of political power, of Zionism's dream turned into the reality of self-determination." So, one paragraph down from condemning Israeli ethno-nationalists, she literally says that murdering civilians and children is an unavoidable burden of her political ideology, Zionism. What does this show? In my opinion, it shows just a depraved sense of morals. I mean, even if she was going to defend the Israeli airstrikes on Palestinian civilians, you don't have to spell it out, right? You can just say these are reasonable retaliations for the gruesome bombings of Palestinian rockets into Israel or something like that. But no, she spells it right out. She says, "It is one of the unavoidable burdens of political power, of Zionism's dream." So, the article is off to a very bad start. So, after having written that subjugating and occupying other people, murdering their children and other civilians in the hundreds is alright to achieve their political goals of Zionism, she writes that the narrative, probably referring to what some celebrities and media are saying about the Israel-Palestine conflict, being slightly more critical against the Israeli government than last time in 2014. So she says, the narrative insists that Israel is not just an oppressive force, but the last standing bastion of colonialism in the Middle East. She says that the Israelis are accused of being terrible and child killers, but the Israeli airstrikes did impact children, and Zionists probably referring to people around the world and in the United States, what are we? We are the facilitators of all this evil. And of course, you can't accuse any Jew without knowing him or her to be Zionist and supporters of this. But Bari Weiss, we know for sure. She is a facilitator of the evil, considering that she constantly defends the Israeli government, making their arguments for them in their largest donor country, the United States. And as you can see in her writings, she can defend just about anything that the Israeli government does. So, I mean, she can write this as some kind of rhetorical question. But it is the truth. So that pretty much sums up the article, and Bari Weiss being an Israeli government apologist. But this article wasn't only published on her personal Substack, where political nerds like myself, people looking for some rage bait, and their fans read it. I found this exact article in German for the German newspaper Die Welt. So, looks like she found something to do after the New York Times. I am sorry the Germans have to suffer with her now, but at least she no longer works at the New York Times. But if you thought this was the only time that Bari Weiss would chime in on the Israel Palestine conflict, think again, because Bari Weiss, unfortunately, is a user of Twitter, and she has used it very frequently during the last days, and making some grand attacks on, for instance, progressives, other Jews, and just about anyone standing between Israel and the domination of the Palestinians. During and after the conflict between Israel and Palestine, many Jewish Americans were assaulted on the streets, and Jewish hate crimes rose sharply. And this is totally disgusting. I mean, innocent people just belonging to a religion and a group of people being attacked viciously, sometimes by pro-Palestinian people, sometimes by neo-Nazis. I mean, everybody should unequivocally condemn this and support those people. They are New Yorkers, for instance, not just Jews, and they're certainly not Israelis. But these things unfortunately happen, and Bari Weiss knows how to use some good hate crimes to further her narrative. It turns out if you turn Israel into the villain in your morality play and insist that Americans have a responsibility to do something, the thing that they will do is beat up American Jews, writes some guy named Seffi Kogan in an article in Newsweek called "How Many Jews Need to Be Attacked in America Before Progressives Speak Up?" This is retweeted by Bari Weiss, and in the article you just find a scathing attack against progressives using all of the pro-Israel talking points that are in the book. Among the claims made in the article is that Senator Bernie Sanders published his own dangerous anti-Israel harangue in an op-ed which began, "No one is arguing that Israel does not have the right to self-defense or protect its people," even as supporters were doing that on social media. And the gist of that article, I read it, is that he wants to take a look at about $4 billion in military aid to Israel. And that isn't even a radical position. It's not anti-Semitic, it's not anti-Jews, it's just slightly critical to Israel buying bombs for American funds to slaughter civilians. And he also criticized John Oliver and Trevor Noah for talking about the disproportionality of civilian deaths on each side. And then he also makes the argument that Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and of course progressives in general, kind of ignore the violence and provides justification. While anti-Zionist gangs beat up Jews in their city, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was providing a quasi-intellectual basis for their actions, defaming Israel as an apartheid state. And I mean, this is quite disgusting, considering that it took literally 1 day for Bernie Sanders to publish a tweet condemning the anti-Semitic violence, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, representing the district in New York, has tweeted several times about how to prevent anti-Semitic street violence. So, as you can see, Sefik Hogan here, being retweeted by Bari Weiss, is trying to justify his position on Israel by using innocent victims of street violence as sort of a shield. You see, it's not that he's not criticizing that progressives are critical to US foreign aid to Israel and Israel's actions. It's that progressives are inciting violence, basically, that's what he claims, against Jews by being anti-Zionist. I mean, this is quite disgusting. And it's not the only example of just using anti-Semitism as a cover for supporting the Israeli government. You see, Sarah Silverman, she tweeted out basically that American Jews are not Israel, they're not the Israeli government, and therefore they do not deserve to get attacked on the streets, and that they need allies. And then Bari Weiss says that this is basically telling an anti-Semite that you're not subhuman. I just find it quite disgusting. It's basically like saying every Jew should be invested in Israel, that any Jew who doesn't is just apologizing to anti-Semites and not being Jewish enough, not owning their identity. And the thing about that is, so many Zionists say that when someone criticizes a person who supports the Israeli government or an organization like AIPAC, they're using the dual loyalty argument, that Jews have dual loyalty to Israel. But in this tweet, and in a tweet that she retweeted, she's basically demanding dual loyalty from people like Sarah Silverman, that they should be with Israel, that we are not Israel, is actually pleading with anti-Semites. So throughout this video, I've shown you instances where Bari Weiss was openly an apologist for the Israeli government, supporting its actions in Gaza, how she routinely smears progressives by retweeting articles, but also writing about them in her own articles, basically calling them anti-Semites and that they make anti-Semitic statements. We have just seen how much of a, pro-Israel hack Bari Weiss is. But in public life, she often tries to get with some kind of veneer to it, saying that she is an intellectual and kind of talking about big questions and just a liberal who's disaffected by the anti-Semitic left and stuff like that. And she even resigned from the New York Times where she worked because of, it's not a liberal place anymore. It's an obvious grift, right? But now that you know this, take a look at when she talks to Joe Rogan in an interview and ask yourself, what do you really see? Do you see an intellectual actually trying to find a solution that both sides could live with in the Israel-Palestine conflict? Or do you see a hack that tries to apologize for the Israeli government and actually is fine with the oppression of the Palestinians?
The Zionist thing is define the difference between Jewish and Zionist.
Zionism, the way that I think is the simplest definition, is the belief in the Jewish right to self-determination, and it's the Jewish liberation movement.
So the anti-Zionist sentiment, when people start talking about Zionists, what they're essentially talking about is Israel just existing.
Yes.
Like they're anti-Israel existing.
Correct. And Jeremy Corbyn made this very plain, where he actually said the words, the BBC has a bias towards believing that Israel has a right to exist.
He said that?
Yes. Yes.
So he's on
Shaman can confirm that.
And he's on the left. Like, he's on the...
He epitomizes the sort of anti-Zionism, which bleeds into antisemitism of the far left. But if you step back and you're like, wait, hold on, there's a political movement gaining popularity in the West that was in fact embodied in the person of Jeremy Corbyn and what became of his Labour Party, that believes that there's only one state in the world that doesn't have a right to exist? Like, that's crazy.
I can't believe he actually said that.
He did.
He
said a lot of things, apparently. I'm trying to find it.
He definitely said it.
He's a ridiculous person. One of my favorite things that he said was, I mean, what is he, like fucking 60? He's like, my pronouns are he, him. Like, shut the fuck up.
But
yeah.
I think the thing to, like, the analogy I make is, like, America has done horrible things. We have, you know, the example everyone loves right now is children in cages at the border.
Yeah.
It's a disgusting, immoral thing that we're doing. But no one goes from that horrible policy to say America shouldn't exist and we should just meld into Canada or Mexico.
Right.
And by the way, they're saying that, they're making that argument in a context where they are literally surrounded by neighbors who want to murder as many Jewish Israelis as possible. Like, it's an immoral, it's an argument that I really can't wrap my mind around, like how people get away with making it.
See, I could see how someone could say that there is evidence that some Israeli soldiers have done horrific things to Palestinian people.
Of course they have.
Yes.
Of course they have.
Yes.
I will never deny that.
And I could see how you could look at where Palestine is and the state of the Palestinian people and saying there has to be a better way for them. It has to be a better civilization for them. It has to improve. These are human beings. It has to be a better, just a better situation. I mean, they're not even recognized as a true state or as a true country by a lot of people. I could see that.
I believe that.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
I believe that because I'm a human.
Distinguish, right?
Yes, I believe that because I'm a human being, and I believe that also because I'm a Zionist. I don't want the state of Israel and the state that's supposed to be embodying Jewish ideas to be occupying another people. Like, that is a state, like, that is horrible.
What can be done about it?
Well, here's the problem, right? We saw what happened in the Israeli pullout from the Gaza Strip. It pulled out completely all of the settlements from the Gaza Strip. There's not a single Jew left there. It's completely Judenrein. And yet, Hamas is still sending tons of rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel. So the problem is Israel then sees what happens in Gaza and they're like, okay, we're in this situation where we want to be a liberal democracy and yet we're, occupying another people. It's an untenable situation if you want to be a liberal democracy to occupy another people. The problem is literally geographically, if they pull out of the West Bank, they will likely have another situation like they had in Gaza. So what do you do?
What do you do?
I don't know.
Does anyone know? Does anyone have a rational course?
No. Really, no. I mean, I think one of the places we've arrived to, right, is like, what does Palestinian nationalism really seek? Western liberals like me want, or for years, I told myself, and I think this was certainly like the view of lots of experts, that what Palestinian nationalism really wanted was a Palestinian state. Palestinians just want self-determination like everyone else in the world. And I am absolutely on board with that. The problem is that their leaders, and then you look at some of these polls and the numbers are really disturbing, and they say, no, the goal is not having our own state alongside Israel. The goal is erasing Israel. The goal is for Israel not to be there, right? And then you look at the evidence of all of these peace offers that were, Oslo and Camp David, and we can go on, and they were all rejected. So it's like, is the goal your own land and having a place of your own, or have we told ourselves, and I include myself in this, a lie about what Palestinian nationalism, or at least parts of it, seek? And that's really, really upsetting to confront. Well, the solution is shrinking the conflict as much as possible, right? I do not believe right now you can resolve the conflict. But again, it's like, you have to ask yourself, like, why does everyone in the world obsessed about this particular conflict?
Yeah.
There's a weird obsession with it.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's inescapable that part of it is an obsession with the Jews. Anti-Zionism, I think, is the modern form, one of the modern forms of anti-Semitism.
So, you see, Bari Weiss isn't trying to solve the conflict. She's trying to gaslight you into complacency, that there is no solution, and that things should remain like the status quo. Anyway, that was my video about Bari Weiss's reaction to the fallout over the Israel Palestine conflict and how she is a grifter. So if you like this content and you want to see more of it, then please consider subscribing to my channel, hitting the like button, leave a comment. It's always nice to read your comments, and I often like to respond to them. And that's pretty much it. But remember, guys, Bari Weiss does suck, and do not take serious anything that she says without credible people also subscribing to the idea. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Well, I don't know if we've gotten rid of all our corruption.
No, you haven't.
But I'll tell you one thing. Unlike America, Israel seems to be able to fight wars very quickly. What is your secret? Because we don't seem to have the hang of that.
The secret is that we have America.